Forgotten theaters of war, the lesser-known theaters of World War II played critical roles in shaping the overall conflict, yet they are often overshadowed by the major battles in Europe and the Pacific. These regions saw fierce fighting, strategic maneuvers, and extraordinary sacrifices, influencing the war's outcome in ways that deserve more attention. One such theater was the North African Campaign, a crucial battleground for control of the Mediterranean and access to vital resources like oil and trade routes. The North African Campaign began in 1940 and involved the Allied forces, including the British Commonwealth, Free French troops, and eventually American forces, pitted against the Axis powers led by Germany and Italy. The vast deserts of North Africa became the stage for battles of maneuver, where tanks, aircraft, and logistics played a defining role. One of the most significant confrontations was the Battle of El Alamein in Egypt in 1942. Led by British General Bernard Montgomery, the Allies halted the advance of the German Afrika Korps, commanded by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, also known as the Desert Fox. This victory marked a turning point in the campaign and was critical in preventing Axis forces from seizing control of the Suez Canal, a vital lifeline for Allied supply routes. The harsh desert environment posed unique challenges for both sides. Soldiers endured extreme heat during the day and freezing temperatures at night. Sandstorms could appear without warning, disrupting visibility and damaging equipment. Supply lines stretched across hundreds of miles of barren terrain, making logistics a constant struggle. Both sides relied heavily on motorized transport and the ability to secure fuel, food, and water, often targeting the enemy's supply depots to gain an advantage. In addition to North Africa, the Middle East also became a battleground. Countries like Iraq and Iran were strategically important because of their oil reserves. In 1941, a pro-Axis coup in Iraq threatened to destabilize the region, prompting British forces to intervene and restore a pro-Allied government. Similarly, Iran, then known as Persia, became a critical supply route for the Allies after the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. The Allies launched Operation Countenance to occupy Iran, ensuring the safe transport of supplies through the Persian corridor to the Soviet Union, which was crucial for sustaining the Red Army on the Eastern Front. Another often overlooked theater was Southeast Asia. The Burma Campaign was one of the longest and most grueling campaigns of the war, lasting from 1941 to 1945. This region saw British, Indian, Chinese, and American forces fighting against the Japanese army in dense jungles, mountainous terrain, and extreme humidity. Burma was strategically important because it served as a gateway to India, a vital colony for the British Empire, and also bordered China, where the Allies were supporting Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces. The terrain in Burma created immense logistical and operational challenges. Dense jungles, torrential monsoon rains, and poor infrastructure made movement difficult and often slowed the progress of both armies. Malaria, dysentery, and other tropical diseases claimed more lives than actual combat in some instances. Despite these obstacles, the Allied forces achieved significant victories, such as the Battle of Imphal and the Battle of Kohima in 1944. These battles marked the turning point in the campaign, with Japanese forces suffering devastating losses. The victory at Kohima is remembered for the fierce fighting around the Kohima Ridge and the resilience of the defenders, who stopped the Japanese advance into India. One of the most critical aspects of the Burma campaign was the role of the Chindits, a British-led special operations force. Operating deep behind Japanese lines, the Chindits conducted guerrilla warfare, sabotaged railways and supply depots, and gathered intelligence. Their operations were highly dangerous and often required surviving for months in hostile territory with limited supplies. The campaign also highlighted the contributions of Indian soldiers, who made up a significant portion of the Allied forces in Burma. Their bravery and sacrifices were instrumental in securing victory in the region. Further south, the Pacific War overshadowed campaigns in the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, which saw intense fighting between Allied and Japanese forces. The Dutch, supported by British and Australian troops, attempted to defend their colonies but were overwhelmed by Japan's rapid and coordinated attacks. The fall of the Dutch East Indies was significant because it gave Japan access to vital oil reserves, bolstering its war machine. However, resistance continued even after the Japanese occupation, with local guerrilla fighters and Allied forces carrying out covert operations. The war also reached the island nations of the Indian Ocean, such as Madagascar, where the Allies launched an invasion in 1942 to prevent the Japanese from using it as a naval base. The Battle of Madagascar, known as Operation Ironclad, was a largely forgotten campaign but played a crucial role in securing Allied control of vital shipping lanes in East Africa, another lesser-known front. The Allies fought to liberate Italian-occupied Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia from fascist control. The East African Campaign, which lasted from 1940 to 1941, involved British Commonwealth forces, Ethiopian resistance fighters, and Free French troops against Italian forces loyal to Mussolini. The campaign culminated in the liberation of Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital, in 1941, restoring Emperor Haile Selassie to his throne. This victory was a symbolic blow to Axis powers and inspired resistance movements across Africa. China, often referred to as the forgotten ally, played a critical but underappreciated role in World War II. The Second Sino-Japanese War, which began in 1937, became part of the broader conflict when Japan joined the Axis powers. Chinese forces tied down over 500,000 Japanese troops throughout the war, preventing them from being deployed elsewhere. The Chinese endured unimaginable hardships, including mass civilian casualties and widespread destruction of cities, but their resistance was a vital contribution to the Allied war effort. Another overlooked aspect of the war in Asia is the role of the Indian National Army, INA, led by Subhas Chandra Bose. The INA was composed of Indian soldiers captured by the Japanese and Indian expatriates, who sought to end British colonial rule in India by collaborating with Japan. While controversial, the INA's actions highlighted the complex motivations and alliances that emerged during the war. These lesser-known theaters of World War II demonstrate the global scale of the conflict and the interconnectedness of its battles. While Europe and the Pacific often dominate the narrative, the campaigns in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia were equally significant in determining the war's outcome. They also remind us of the sacrifices made by people from diverse backgrounds and regions, whose contributions deserve recognition and remembrance.
Female spy and resistance. Women played crucial roles as spies and resistance fighters during World War II, contributing to the war effort in ways that were daring, ingenious, and often overlooked. Many risked their lives behind enemy lines, operating as secret agents, messengers, and saboteurs, while others led entire resistance networks. Their courage and resilience changed the course of the war in many areas. Noor Inayat Khan, an Indian-born British secret agent, is one of the most remarkable examples. Born into a Sufi Muslim family and a descendant of Indian royalty, Noor was a pacifist by nature, but she believed it was her duty to fight the oppression brought by Nazi Germany. She became a wireless operator for the Special Operations Executive (SOE), a British organization formed to conduct espionage and sabotage in Nazi-occupied territories. Operating in France under the codename Madeleine, she transmitted crucial information back to the Allies while constantly evading German detection. The life expectancy of a wireless operator in occupied France was about 6 weeks, but Noor lasted far longer. Unfortunately, she was betrayed, captured by the Gestapo, and tortured. Despite months of brutal interrogation, she refused to give up any information about her mission or colleagues. In her final moments at Dachau concentration camp, she reportedly shouted, "Liberté," before being executed. She posthumously received the George Cross, one of the highest awards for bravery in Britain. Another extraordinary figure was Nancy Wake, known as the White Mouse by the Gestapo due to her ability to evade capture. Born in New Zealand and raised in Australia, Nancy married a wealthy French industrialist and became deeply involved in the French resistance after Germany invaded France. She worked as a courier and saboteur, smuggling supplies and people across enemy lines and helping Allied pilots escape back to Britain. At one point, she bicycled over 500 kilometers in 72 hours to deliver vital information to the resistance. After her husband was captured and executed by the Nazis, she became even more determined to fight. Nancy eventually joined the SOE and parachuted back into France, where she led guerrilla attacks on German installations, sabotaged supply lines, and killed a German soldier with her bare hands during an ambush. She became one of the most decorated women of the war, receiving honors from Britain, France, and the United States. The SOE recruited many other women to operate behind enemy lines, knowing that their presence was often less suspicious than that of male agents. Women like Odette Sansom, Violet Sabo, and Pearl Witherington played critical roles in organizing sabotage operations and coordinating with resistance groups. Odette Sansom, for example, infiltrated occupied France and helped establish resistance networks while posing as the wife of a fellow agent. She was eventually captured, tortured, and sent to a concentration camp, but she survived the war and became the first woman to receive the George Cross. Violet Sabo, another SOE agent, was only in her early 20s when she undertook dangerous missions in France. After her husband, a French soldier, was killed in action, She volunteered for the SOE and went on to conduct reconnaissance missions, gather intelligence, and sabotage German operations. On her second mission, she was captured by the Nazis after a fierce gunfight and sent to a concentration camp, where she was executed. Her bravery and sacrifice were later immortalized in the film Carve Her Name with Pride. Pearl Witherington, another notable SOE operative, was born in Paris to British parents and joined the SOE after fleeing to Britain in 1940. She parachuted into France in 1943 and took over a major resistance network after its leader was captured. Under her command, her group carried out numerous sabotage operations, including derailing trains and attacking German convoys. By the time of the D-Day landings, her network had grown to over 3,000 members, significantly disrupting German operations. Despite her achievements, she was initially denied military honors because the British government classified her as a civilian. After much protest, she was eventually recognized for her service. Women's contributions to resistance movements were not limited to espionage. In Poland, women played a major role in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, fighting alongside men in the resistance against German occupation. They served as couriers, nurses, and combatants, often engaging in fierce battles to defend their city. In Yugoslavia, women were active in partisan groups led by Josip Broz Tito, taking up arms against the Axis powers and contributing to one of the most effective resistance movements in Europe. In the Netherlands, women like Hannie Schaaf became symbols of resistance. Hannie, nicknamed the girl with the red hair, joined the Dutch resistance and carried out assassinations, sabotaged railways, and smuggled Jewish children to safety. Her striking appearance made her an easy target for the Nazis, and she was eventually captured and executed shortly before the war ended. Today, she is remembered as a national hero. Resistance efforts weren't limited to Europe. In Asia, women played pivotal roles in fighting against Japanese occupation. In the Philippines, female guerrilla fighters like Nieves Fernandez led local resistance groups, ambushing Japanese forces and sabotaging supply lines. In China, women supported the fight against Japanese aggression through espionage, logistics, and even combat. Women also supported the war effort on the home front, often engaging in resistance activities that required incredible courage and resourcefulness. In occupied countries like France, Poland, and Denmark, women smuggled weapons, distributed anti-Nazi propaganda, and provided shelter to fugitives, including Allied airmen and Jewish families. These seemingly small acts of defiance collectively undermined the Axis powers and helped the Allied cause. Despite their immense contributions, many of these women faced gender-based discrimination during and after the war. They were often overlooked for awards and recognition, with their roles dismissed as secondary to those of male soldiers. It was only decades later that many of their stories began to emerge, thanks to historians, filmmakers, and surviving family members who sought to honor their legacies. The impact of women in espionage and resistance during World War II is immeasurable. Their bravery not only contributed to the defeat of the Axis powers, but also demonstrated the strength and capability of women in roles traditionally reserved for men. Their stories serve as a testament to the power of courage, determination, and the fight for freedom in the face of tyranny.
Role of neutral countries. Neutral countries during World War II, such as Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, and Portugal, played complex and often controversial roles in the conflict. While officially declaring neutrality, these nations navigated a delicate balance between the Axis and Allied powers, engaging in diplomacy, trade, espionage, and humanitarian efforts. Their neutrality was far from passive. In many cases, it was marked by pragmatic decisions that had lasting impacts on the war and its aftermath. Sweden, for instance, maintained its neutrality while walking a fine line between economic cooperation with Nazi Germany and humanitarian support for the Allies. Sweden's vast iron ore reserves were critical to the German war machine, as the ore was used to produce steel for weapons and machinery. The Germans relied heavily on shipments of Swedish iron ore, particularly during the early years of the war. To ensure these shipments continued, Germany pressured Sweden into allowing the transit of German troops and military supplies through Swedish territory, particularly in the case of the Permatentrafik, a controversial arrangement where German soldiers were transported via Swedish railways to the Eastern Front. At the same time, Sweden was a refuge for those fleeing Nazi persecution. Thousands of Danish Jews were smuggled across the Razun Strait to safety in Sweden during the war. Swedish diplomats such as Raoul Wallenberg played heroic roles in saving Jewish lives. Wallenberg, stationed in Hungary, issued protective passports and sheltered Jews, ultimately saving tens of thousands from deportation to concentration camps. Sweden also provided significant material and financial aid to the Norwegian and Danish resistance movements, helping to undermine German occupation in Scandinavia. Switzerland, surrounded by Axis-controlled territory, also maintained its neutrality, though its position was fraught with controversy. The Swiss banking system became a safe haven for Nazi gold, some of which was looted from occupied countries and Jewish victims of the Holocaust. While this economic collaboration with Nazi Germany has been criticized, Switzerland also became a hub for espionage. Intelligence agents from both the Allies and the Axis operated in Switzerland, taking advantage of its central location and relatively open borders to exchange information and coordinate secret operations. Switzerland also played a vital humanitarian role. It provided asylum to over 300,000 refugees, though it controversially turned away many others, including Jewish refugees, under restrictive immigration policies. Swiss humanitarian organizations, including the International Red Cross, were instrumental in delivering aid to prisoners of war and civilian populations in occupied territories. Swiss factories also produced war materials, often selling them to both sides, which further complicated their neutral stance. Spain, under Francisco Franco's authoritarian regime, declared neutrality at the outbreak of the war, but later shifted to a position of non-belligerence, favoring the Axis powers. While Franco never formally entered the war, Spain supported Germany in several indirect ways. Spanish volunteers, organized into the Blue Division, fought alongside the Germans on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union. Spain also supplied Germany with raw materials like tungsten, which was crucial for manufacturing weapons. Despite its leanings toward the Axis, Spain also engaged in covert cooperation with the Allies. British intelligence operated extensively in Spain, monitoring Axis movements and conducting sabotage operations. Spain's geographic position made it a key transit point for Allied spies and escape routes for downed pilots, Jewish refugees, and resistance fighters fleeing occupied Europe. Franco's regime also allowed the Allies to use Spain as a channel for humanitarian aid to Europe. Portugal, under the leadership of Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, also declared neutrality but played a significant role as a bridge between the Axis and Allied powers. Portugal's colonies, particularly the Azores, became strategically important for both sides. The Allies negotiated with Salazar to establish military bases in the Azores, which proved critical for anti-submarine operations and securing Atlantic shipping lanes. Portugal also exported tungsten to Germany, although it eventually limited these shipments under Allied pressure. Like Switzerland and Sweden, Portugal served as a hub for espionage and covert activities. Lisbon, the Portuguese capital, became a hotbed of intrigue, with spies from every major power operating in the city. It was a key location for intelligence exchanges, smuggling operations, and clandestine meetings. Lisbon also became a gateway for refugees escaping Nazi-occupied Europe, including many Jews who fled to safety through Portugal before emigrating to other countries. Ireland, another neutral nation, also navigated a precarious position during the war. Officially, the Irish government, led by Eamon de Valera, maintained a strict policy of neutrality, refusing to allow Allied forces to use Irish ports or airfields. This stance was partly driven by a desire to assert Ireland's sovereignty after centuries of British rule. However, Ireland did provide covert assistance to the Allies. Irish intelligence shared information with Britain, and thousands of Irish citizens volunteered to fight in the British armed forces. Ireland also repatriated downed Allied pilots who landed on its territory, while interning German airmen as prisoners of war. Neutrality during World War II often came at a moral cost. In many cases, neutral countries made concessions to the Axis powers to preserve their sovereignty, leading to accusations of complicity or profiteering. At the same time, these nations also played critical roles in humanitarian efforts, intelligence gathering, and resistance support. Their neutrality was rarely absolute. Instead, it was a series of calculated decisions aimed at survival in a world engulfed by war. After the war, the roles of neutral countries were scrutinized, leading to debates about their responsibilities and ethical conduct. For example, Sweden faced criticism for its early economic ties with Nazi Germany, while Switzerland's banking practices and refusal to admit more Jewish refugees sparked international condemnation. Despite these controversies, the contributions of these countries to humanitarian aid, espionage, and the preservation of cultural and intellectual resources remain significant aspects of the war's legacy. Neutral nations demonstrated that even those not directly involved in combat had a profound impact on the course of history.
The rescue to European art culture. During World War II, the rescue of European art and culture was a monumental effort undertaken by individuals and organizations determined to protect humanity's shared heritage from destruction and theft. As Nazi Germany looted cultural treasures across Europe, targeting museums, churches, and private collections, the Allies initiated plans to safeguard and recover priceless works of art, manuscripts, and architectural landmarks. The Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives Program (MFAA), known as the Monuments Men, was a specialized unit established by the Allies to protect cultural heritage in war zones. Comprised of art historians, curators, architects, and archivists, they were tasked with identifying, preserving, and recovering looted or endangered artworks. Their mission often involved venturing into active combat zones and securing cultural sites, such as historic buildings and museums, from damage during military operations. The Nazis, under Hitler's orders, looted millions of art pieces from occupied countries. Hitler envisioned creating the Führer Museum in Linz, Austria, to display the stolen treasures. Meanwhile, Hermann Göring, a high-ranking Nazi official, amassed a personal collection of looted art. Jewish collectors and dealers were particularly targeted, with their assets confiscated and families forced into exile or worse. The Allies' response involved tracking the movement of stolen artworks. One major discovery was in Neuschwanstein Castle, where the Nazis had stored art stolen from French Jewish collectors. Another critical find was the Alta Sea salt mine in Austria, where the Nazis had hidden thousands of works, including masterpieces by Michelangelo, Vermeer, and Rembrandt. The salt mine was rigged with explosives to destroy the collection if Germany fell, but local miners and the MFAA intervened to prevent the destruction. In addition to recovery efforts, the MFAA worked to prevent further damage during Allied bombings. Cultural landmarks like the Cathedral of Florence and Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper were shielded from harm whenever possible. In Italy, American and British forces took special care to avoid damaging ancient ruins and Renaissance architecture during their campaigns. Artists and intellectuals also played a role in protecting cultural heritage. In Paris, museum curators smuggled the Louvre's treasures, including the Mona Lisa, to secret locations in the French countryside before the Nazis occupied the city. Similarly, in the Soviet Union, curators evacuated invaluable collections from the Hermitage Museum in Leningrad to Siberia, where they remained safe during the brutal siege. Despite these efforts, many works of art remain missing to this day, with ongoing efforts to locate and repatriate them. Some stolen pieces resurface decades later in private collections or auctions, leading to legal battles over their rightful ownership. Many Jewish families continue to fight for the return of artworks stolen during the Holocaust. The legacy of the Monuments Men and similar efforts underscores the importance of preserving cultural identity during times of war. Their work not only safeguarded artistic achievements, but also symbolized the resilience of civilization in the face of barbarism. Today, their mission serves as a foundation for modern cultural protection efforts in conflict zones around the world.
The secret cities of the World War II. During World War II, secret cities played an essential role in the development of nuclear weapons and other strategic technologies, but their existence was kept hidden from the public, even from those who worked there. These cities were often located in remote areas and were subject to strict security measures to prevent information leaks. One of the most notable secret cities was Los Alamos, New Mexico, which was the heart of the Manhattan Project, the U.S. program to develop the atomic bomb. Los Alamos was established in 1942 under the direction of the U.S. government and physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. The city was created as a highly classified scientific and military facility, and its residents were subject to secrecy agreements, with many scientists unaware of the full scope of the project. The workers, scientists, and their families were prohibited from discussing their work, and the city was isolated from the surrounding areas to prevent accidental exposure to its purpose. The secrecy surrounding Los Alamos was so tight that even the townspeople were not informed about the nature of the research being conducted there. In addition to Los Alamos, there were several other secret cities in the U.S. dedicated to the production of materials needed for the Manhattan Project. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, was one such city, where the enrichment of uranium was carried out in massive, secret facilities. Oak Ridge was a planned community that housed workers who were involved in the production of the materials that would later be used in atomic bombs. The workers were not told what the final product would be, and many believed they were working on some sort of top-secret military weapon. Another key location was the Hanford site in Washington state, where plutonium was produced for the atomic bomb. Hanford was a sprawling, secretive facility that employed thousands of workers to process uranium into plutonium. The workers had little idea of the purpose of their work, and they were isolated from the surrounding communities for security reasons. The production of plutonium at Hanford culminated in the creation of the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. In the United Kingdom, there was the top-secret city of Harwell, Oxfordshire, which was a centre for research and development on nuclear technology. While not as large or isolated as the American secret cities, Harwell was a critical part of the British effort to develop nuclear weapons. Many of the scientists working there were also involved in the British atomic bomb project, which was a collaborative effort between the UK and the US. These secret cities were not only focused on the development of nuclear weapons but also played a role in other areas of research, such as radar technology, aircraft production, and chemical weapons development. The facilities were often located in remote or sparsely populated areas to keep their activities hidden from the public and to protect national security. The residents of these secret cities often had to live under strict conditions, including limited contact with the outside world and constant surveillance. While the work they were doing was of vital importance to the war effort, many of the workers were unaware of the true nature of their tasks. This secrecy continued for decades, with many details of the work done in these cities only becoming public after the war ended. The secret cities of World War II highlight the extraordinary efforts made to develop new technologies that would change the course of the war. They also serve as a reminder of the levels of secrecy and control exercised by governments during times of global conflict. Today, some of these sites, like Los Alamos and Oak Ridge, are preserved as historical landmarks, allowing the public to learn about the groundbreaking work done in these hidden cities.
The Japanese-American 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The Japanese-American 442nd Regimental Combat Team is one of the most decorated military units in U.S. history, yet its story is often overlooked in mainstream accounts of World War II. Composed primarily of Japanese-American soldiers, the 442nd was formed during a time of widespread anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States, particularly following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Despite facing discrimination and suspicion, these soldiers proved their loyalty and courage through their remarkable service. The 442nd was initially created in 1943, drawing primarily from Japanese-American men from Hawaii and internment camps on the U.S. mainland, where tens of thousands of Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Many of these soldiers had family members who were being held in these camps, yet they chose to serve, determined to prove their patriotism and loyalty to the United States. The unit's motto was "Go for Broke," reflecting their commitment to give everything for their country, despite the prejudice they faced. Throughout World War II, the 442nd saw action in Italy, France, and Germany. Their first major engagement was in Italy, where they fought in the brutal fighting at the Battle of Monte Cassino, a crucial battle in the Allied campaign to break through German defenses in Italy. The 442nd earned a reputation for courage and determination, often being assigned some of the most difficult and dangerous missions. One of their most notable achievements came during the liberation of France. The 442nd's most famous action was the rescue of the Lost Battalion during the Battle of the Vosges in October 1944. A group of around 200 Texas soldiers had become surrounded by German forces and were in imminent danger of being wiped out. The 442nd was tasked with breaking through enemy lines to rescue them. Despite facing harsh terrain and intense German fire, the 442nd successfully rescued the soldiers, but at a heavy cost. The unit suffered over 800 casualties, with many men being wounded or killed in the attempt. In total, the 442nd earned over 18,000 awards for valor, including 21 Congressional Medals of Honor. Their accomplishments were recognized by both their fellow soldiers and military leadership, though, at the time, the unit's heroism was often downplayed due to racial prejudices. For many years, the contributions of Japanese-American soldiers were not widely acknowledged, and their story remained largely unknown to the broader public. After the war, many members of the 442nd returned to find their families still living in internment camps, a stark reminder of the challenges they had faced during their service. Despite the hardships they endured, the 442nd became a symbol of resilience and patriotism. In the decades following the war, efforts were made to recognize their contributions. In 2000, President Bill Clinton awarded the 442nd Regimental Combat Team the Congressional Gold Medal, acknowledging their sacrifices and bravery. The legacy of the 442nd continues to inspire, illustrating the strength of character and devotion to duty of Japanese-American soldiers who served in World War II. Their story stands as a testament to overcoming adversity, and their contributions are now celebrated as a crucial part of American military history.
Environmental impacts of the war. World War II had profound and far-reaching environmental impacts, many of which continue to affect ecosystems and landscapes today. The massive scale of industrialization, warfare, and resource extraction during the war caused widespread destruction to natural environments and left long-term scars on the planet. These effects were not confined to specific regions. The war's environmental consequences were felt across continents. Deforestation was a significant consequence of the war, as vast amounts of timber were required for construction, fuel, and other military purposes. In Europe, forests were cleared to provide wood for trench construction, bridges, and railway ties, while in Asia, Japanese forces decimated forests in occupied territories like the Philippines and Southeast Asia for their war effort. This large-scale deforestation disrupted ecosystems and contributed to soil erosion and habitat loss, further exacerbating environmental degradation. Agricultural land was severely affected by military activities, especially in Europe and parts of Asia. Bombing campaigns, tank battles, and troop movements destroyed farmland, leaving soil infertile and littered with unexploded ordnance. In many areas, agricultural productivity was diminished for years due to contamination and destruction. For example, in Eastern Europe, vast tracts of farmland were rendered unusable as battles raged across the region. Oil spills and chemical pollution became significant environmental problems during the war. Naval battles in the Atlantic and Pacific often resulted in the sinking of oil tankers and warships, releasing massive amounts of oil into the oceans. These spills damaged marine ecosystems and killed countless sea creatures. The industrial production of munitions and chemicals also led to widespread contamination of soil and water near factories and testing sites. For instance, mustard gas and other chemical weapons were disposed of in oceans and rivers, creating long-term hazards for aquatic life. Urban bombing campaigns caused extensive destruction to cities and their surrounding environments. The firebombing of cities like Dresden, Tokyo, and Hamburg not only killed civilians, but also caused massive air and soil pollution from the burning of buildings and infrastructure. These bombings released toxic chemicals, such as asbestos, heavy metals, and hydrocarbons, into the atmosphere, contaminating the environment for decades. Nuclear weapons testing and deployment during the war introduced an entirely new category of environmental harm. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only killed tens of thousands of people, but also caused severe radiation contamination. The long-term effects included mutations in plants and animals, as well as soil and water contamination that persisted for decades. Additionally, nuclear tests conducted as part of the Manhattan Project, such as at the Trinity site in New Mexico, left radiation that continues to affect the area today. Military infrastructure and logistics also contributed to environmental degradation. The construction of airfields, bases, and roads often involved clearing large areas of natural habitat. For example, in the Pacific Theater, coral reefs and mangroves were destroyed to build runways and ports. These activities disrupted delicate ecosystems and reduced biodiversity. Similarly, the use of coral and limestone to build military installations in the Pacific damaged marine environments. The war's impact on wildlife was devastating. In Europe, Asia, and Africa, many animal populations were decimated as a result of habitat destruction, hunting for food, and direct conflict. In some cases, iconic species were driven to near extinction. For instance, elephants in Southeast Asia were hunted or used for military transport, leading to significant population declines. Birds and mammals suffered as their habitats were destroyed by bombing, deforestation, and agriculture. One of the most significant long-term environmental effects of World War II was the acceleration of industrial and chemical production. To meet wartime demands, factories produced unprecedented quantities of synthetic materials, such as plastics and chemicals, including pesticides and explosives. After the war, many of these industries continued to operate at high capacity, leading to increased pollution and the spread of hazardous substances. World War II also marked the beginning of large-scale global energy consumption, particularly of fossil fuels. The war effort required vast amounts of oil, coal, and natural gas, driving the expansion of energy infrastructure. This reliance on fossil fuels set the stage for the post-war energy boom and contributed to the rise in greenhouse gas emissions, a major factor in today's climate crisis. Even decades after the war, some areas continue to deal with the environmental consequences of World War II. Sites of major battles such as Normandy and Stalingrad still contain unexploded bombs, shells, and mines, posing threats to both humans and wildlife. In the Pacific, sunken warships and submarines continue to leak oil and other pollutants into the ocean. Cleanup efforts have been launched in some areas, but the environmental damage remains significant. In summary, World War II caused unparalleled environmental destruction, from deforestation and pollution to radiation and habitat loss. While the war ended in 1945, its ecological impacts lingered for decades, shaping modern environmental challenges. Understanding these consequences highlights the need for sustainable practices during times of conflict and peace.